Welcome to a deep dive. Okay, so you've given us a whole stack of material here. Reports, articles, interviews, all focused on Aston Martin in Formula One.
That's right.
And the idea is we need to sift through it, pull out what really matters, get behind the headlines, and figure out what's actually going on with the team.
Exactly. I mean, it's a team that's clearly invested a ton lately. They brought in some huge names, but, well, the results haven't quite lived up to the hype, maybe, or even the potential they've sometimes shown.
Right. So we're going to unpack the latest news, look at the technical side, hear from Fernando Alonso himself, and crucially, look ahead to the future, especially 2026.
Yeah, those big rule changes are looming large for everyone.
Our mission then is pretty clear. Give you the essential takeaways from all this material, make sense of it all.
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's start with Monaco, because that was, well, a pretty frustrating weekend for Alonso, wasn't it? Looked decent after qualifying then. Nothing in the race. 0 points.
Yeah, Monaco was definitely a setback. Qualifying showed, there is pace there with the recent upgrades, but the race, it was pretty much scuppered by an engine issue.
And not just a small issue.
Right.
A failure. But the sources say it wasn't like an instant thing.
No, apparently from around lap 15, maybe a bit later, he lost the electrical part of the power unit, the MGUK, basically.
Well, that's, what, 160 horsepower? Just gone?
Yeah, something like that. A massive amount of power just disappears. And even though Monaco isn't all about top speed, that's still a huge handicap.
It really is. And yet, the interesting thing in the notes is that even just on the combustion engine, his lap times weren't that far off initially, like 3 seconds slower.
Yeah, which sounds like a lot, but in Monaco, you can sometimes defend if the car's handling okay, because overtaking is so hard. He was apparently holding a top 8 spot for a while.
Shows how good he is, maybe. But eventually it just couldn't hold on.
No, the motor finally gave up completely. Lap 36 at Rascasse, apparently. Just a really disappointing end after managing that problem for so long.
Andy Cowell, the team principal, talked about it after. Said they didn't have the exact cause straight away.
Right. He mentioned the problem really hit from lap 21 onwards. Slightly different lap number, but the same idea. They decided to keep him out, just running the ICE, hoping, maybe a safety car, maybe sneak a point somehow.
You could almost hear the frustration. He felt bad for Fernando, said he was on track for maybe 6th or 7th, which, as he put it, would have been good points for them right now.
And points are exactly what they need. Cowell did mention the exceptionally good qualifying as a positive sign.
Well, he was clear, wasn't he? Points are what really matters, especially when you're on a bit of a dry spell.
Absolutely. And that Monaco weekend, beyond the on-track stuff, seems like it really brought some other, maybe deeper issues into focus for the team.
Which brings us neatly to, well, the arrival of a certain ADRIAN Newey. Monaco was his first race weekend officially with Aston Martin, wasn't it?
It was. His title is Director, Technical Executive, and Associated. And he wasn't just, observing from afar.
No. The report said he was right in there, pit wall, desk in the engineering office, notebook out.
Exactly. He needs to be trackside, see how everything translates, how the team operates. It's key for his assessment.
And while he was there, he made a comment about one of their key tools. Something that really jumped out from the sources you shared.
Oh, yeah. He don't pull any punches. He told the media their brand new, very expensive simulator. Well, it doesn't correlate at all. And he called it a weak tool.
Wow. Doesn't correlate at all. That's blunted, especially for a tool that's supposed to be state-of-the-art.
It really is. And then he put a timeline on fixing it that sounded, well, quite long.
2 years. He said it would take 2 years to sort it out.
Yeah. In F1 terms, 2 years is practically an eternity for fixing a core development tool. And this is where, you see a little bit of difference in perspective within the team, reading between the lines of the sources.
Right, because Andy Cowell seemed to, let's say, gently disagree with that timeline.
He did. The quotes attributed to him were more like, "We won't need 2 years," and he suggested it would be a few months, not years.
So what's going on there? Is it just managing expectations or a genuine difference of opinion on the scale of the problem?
Well, Cowell's point seemed to be that any complex new tool, especially a sim like this that only really came online late last year, takes time to bed in. You have to gather data, refine the models, get that correlation right. It's not flicking a switch.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not instant. He even mentioned, they talked about it in the Monaco debrief, didn't he? The mismatch between sim predictions and reality.
Yeah, and because of that mismatch, they're being more cautious now. They can't just blindly apply setup changes the sim suggests if they don't trust the data yet.
Let's dig into that simulator problem a bit more. What does no correlation actually mean in practical terms?
It basically means the virtual model of the car, how the aero works, how the tires behave, suspension kinematics, all that incredibly complex stuff isn't accurately matching what the real car does on the actual track.
The physics in the computer don't match the physics on the tarmac.
Exactly. And the software, it's not off the shelf. The sources stress it's an endless process of refining it, feeding it real-world data, tweaking the models to improve that match.
And the simulator, the driver-in-the-loop one, it's critical for modern F1 teams, isn't it? Two main uses.
Absolutely central. First, you use it for development testing virtual upgrades before you spend money making them. See if a new wing concept actually works in the simulation.
And second,
Second is race weekend preparation. Optimizing the car setup for a specific track, trying different settings without using up precious track time during a GP weekend.
so if that tool isn't accurate, if it doesn't correlate,
Then it's potentially feeding the team misleading information.
right,
It undermines a huge part of their development cycle and their race preparation. It's a serious issue.
that really highlights what Newey meant when he described the team as being a bit blind on car development and setup because of this.
It does. And Newey also talked about their tools more generally. He acknowledged they have amazing facilities, the factory, the new wind tunnel, which is supposedly top tier,
Right.
but he feels they aren't optimizing them yet. He drew a contrast with Red Bull, saying they were brilliant at getting the most out of their tools, even if some, like the wind tunnel, were older.
So it's not just about having the shiny new toys. It's about knowing exactly how to use them, the whole process around them.
Precisely. It's the methodology, the feedback loops, the culture. So back to the timeline thing. Cowell seeing improvement in months might be about getting the sim usable and building trust for detailed work. Newey's 2 years might be about integrating it perfectly into his way of working, optimizing the entire development ecosystem to his standard, which is, a much bigger picture thing.
It's interesting, though, the sources do say the simulator was used for mapping the latest aero upgrade, the one they brought to Imola.
Right, so it's clearly operational. They are using it. It's just the level of accuracy and trust that seems to be the question mark right now.
And as you mentioned, the sim only came online late last year, so it can't be the sole reason for all their development hiccups over the last couple of seasons, can it? There was that trend before.
Exactly. There's been a pattern of upgrades maybe not delivering quite what was hoped for, which predates this specific simulator coming fully online.
Okay, let's widen the lens then. Look at that overall performance trend. Because the recent results, well, they're pretty stark.
They really are. 0 points for either car in the last 6 races. That's tough.
Yeah, the material notes that only Stake Sauber has scored fewer points in that specific period.
Yeah.
That's not where a team with Aston Martin's ambitions wants to be.
Definitely not. Lance Stroll got those 14 points earlier in the year, which is basically the only scoring highlight recently.
But, okay, flip side, you mentioned the upgrade package. The sources seem fairly positive that despite the lack of points, that the upgrade itself did work. It is an improvement.
That seems to be the consensus, yeah. The package they brought over Imola and Monaco does look like it's genuinely made the AMR 25 better, more competitive within that incredibly tight midfield pack.
Cowell's quoted saying, "It works well at low, medium, and high speed, and it's a positive advance."
And you can see glimpses of that. Getting both cars into Q3 at Imola, Alonso getting into Q3 at Monaco, that suggests the underlying pace, the qualifying potential, has improved. It's just that race day problems, the engine failure, questionable strategies perhaps, have stopped them converting that into actual points recently.
That issue with past upgrades maybe not delivering, that seems to be something the team itself recognized. It led to that technical reshuffle over the winter.
Yes, the stated aim was to make that whole process, from factory design to track performance, more robust, to build more confidence, as they put it, that a part developed using their tools would actually work as expected when it hit the track.
Trying to avoid bringing parts that look good on paper, or in the sim maybe, but don't deliver in reality.
Exactly. Eric Bland, the Aero director, had an interesting take in one of the sources. He suggested maybe the team got a bit derailed by its early 2023 success.
Complacent.
And maybe a bit complacent, yeah. Not reviewing their processes rigorously enough because things were going well initially. He thinks Newey coming in will really help sharpen that focus on process.
Interesting point. Sometimes success can hide underlying weaknesses that only show up when things get tougher.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's bring Fernando Alonso into this more directly. We know he's been driving the wheels off the car, often outperforming it. How's he handling all this based on the interviews?
He seems Well, stoic is maybe the word, but
Right.
also very honest. He said pretty directly that he feels his driving level is well above the performance of my Aston Martin right now.
That's quite a statement. Must be frustrating for a driver of his caliber.
You'd have to think so. But his comments about Adrian Newey were
Wow. Yeah, tell us about that.
just absolutely glowing praise. Called him a very special person, a genius, said there's no comparison with anyone else he's worked with. He talked about Newey's creative capacity, his vision. He even called him an educator, saying every word from Newey is a new teaching.
Coming from Alonso, who's seen it all and worked with the best, that's huge.
It really is. It shows the kind of impact Newey is already having internally just by being there.
The sources also mentioned his other activities, like becoming the ambassador for the Barcelona circuit.
Yeah, it touches on him thinking about legacy, even if he says he doesn't focus on it while he's competing. He mentioned how 6 or 7 current F1 drivers started in his karting setup, and maybe 12 or 13 Spanish engineers got a start through scholarships he helped create. He seems genuinely pleased about that.
That's pretty cool. And he also talked about driving a limite on the limit.
Yeah, really interesting insights there. He described it as bringing different feelings, sometimes freedom, sometimes just intense focus and precision, managing risk. He pointed to Monaco qualifying as an example of that intense concentration.
He said nothing else gives him that feeling, right? That adrenaline.
Nothing comes close, apparently, which explains why he's still doing it at his age and loving the challenge.
What about car setup? Does he have strong preferences?
He said he prefers a well-balanced car, which makes sense, but he made a great point that no car is truly perfect at the limit. There's always a weakness, maybe a bit of understeer or oversteer, and the real skill, the satisfaction, comes from driving around that weakness, pushing the car right to and maybe slightly beyond its natural balance.
Fascinating. But speaking of challenges, the strategy calls in Monaco. His radio messages sounded pretty pointed.
Oh, yeah. The sources quoted them directly, things like, "You need to explain to me what you are doing with the strategies," and later, "Now I can't go flat out. If we have degradation, we are out of the race." And after he retired, just, "What did we stop for? A mystery."
Doesn't sound like he was too impressed. And it seems like strategy has been a bit of a sore point before this season, too.
Yeah, there have been a few races where observers, and clearly Alonso himself, have questioned the calls. It seems like an area they might need to sharpen up alongside the car development.
But despite all these current frustrations, the car, the strategies, he's still looking long-term, isn't he? There was that killer quote about 2026.
Absolutely. He basically said he'd take all the current pain, he'd sign up for the struggles right now if it means they're winning races in 2026.
That really sums up his commitment, doesn't it? He believes in the project, believes they can get there, even if it's tough going right now.
It shows why he re-signed. He's banking on those 2026 rules, and the team, with Newey now on board, getting it right.
Which leads us perfectly into 2026. Obviously, those huge rule changes are the big focus for everyone, but maybe especially for a team like Aston Martin looking to make a leap.
Definitely. And the sources are clear. Newey's main job, his primary focus since walking in the door back in March, has been the 2026 car architecture, laying down the fundamental concepts for that new rule set.
Getting the basics right from the very start, Eric Bland called that a massive plus, right? Having Newey thinking about the whole 2026 car concept.
Yeah, Bland believes having Newey overseeing that holistic design from the outset gives them a real chance to make a big step compared to just developing an existing concept.
Newey himself did mention being slightly behind schedule, though.
He did. He said he feels a few months behind, where he'd ideally want to be on the 2026 Aero project. Because the window for Aero testing opened January 1st, but he only started in March.
Does he think that's a major problem?
He said he doesn't think it irreparably compromises the project, but acknowledged that starting later obviously isn't ideal. Adds a bit of pressure.
And this is where that simulator issue becomes absolutely critical again.
Right. Hugely critical. Developing a car for entirely new regulations relies heavily on simulation tools. If your main sim isn't trustworthy, that's a massive disadvantage for 2026 development. So, getting it right, whether it takes Cowell's months or Newey's full 2 years to get the whole process optimized, is absolutely fundamental to their 2026 hopes.
But Newey also added a bit of realism about the overall timeline for success, managing expectations.
Yeah, he cautioned that turning a team that's currently, let's be honest, underachieving relative to its resources into a world championship contender by the start of 2026. Well, that's probably unlikely. Less than 12 months from now, effectively.
So the ambition is sky high. They want to get to the top. Newey is key to that. But it takes time. It's a process.
It's a massive process. You've got the investment, the facilities, the star names, but knitting it all together, optimizing every single part of the operation, from simulation tools to pit stop procedures to race strategy. That's the real challenge in F1, and it doesn't happen overnight.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot. We've seen the recent on-track struggles like that Monaco engine failure, plus those recurring questions around strategy.
Yeah, and then the big one, Adrian Newey's arrival and his immediate, very frank assessment of the simulator correlation issue, along with that interesting difference in perspective with Cowell on how long it'll take to fix.
But we also noted that the recent upgrades do seem to be a step in the right direction performance-wise, even if the points haven't come yet for various reasons.
And we heard from Alonso his incredible driving, his obvious respect for Newey, his long-term commitment focused squarely on 2026, even his off-track legacy building.
It paints a complex picture, doesn't it? A team throwing huge resources at this, bringing in top talent, building amazing facilities, but still grappling with the operational challenges of making it all click perfectly.
Absolutely. They have so many of the right ingredients, but getting the recipe just right, getting that factory-to-track process optimized, especially with tools like the simulator needing work.
Right.
That's the difficult part they're wrestling with now.
So what's the key takeaway for you watching this unfold? It really highlights just how incredibly complex Formula One development is. It's way more than just having money and famous names.
It really is. It's about the nitty-gritty. Calibrating tools meticulously, having robust processes, effective communication, getting those feedback loops working seamlessly. Every single detail matters when the margins are so fine.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe a provocative question for you to ponder. Given Newey's assessment of the simulator and the different timelines being mentioned for the fix, plus the general understanding that optimizing these complex processes takes time, just how patient does Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso perhaps especially need to be?
Is 2026 truly the first realistic chance for them to make that big jump everyone expects? Or if Cowell is right and they can get the simulator correlation sorted in just months, could we maybe see more significant progress sooner than Newey's longer-term view might suggest? Where does the truth lie between those perspectives?
Something to definitely keep watching. Thanks for bringing all these sources together and letting us dig into them.